Alright, so here I am with my sister JoAnn, and she's going to talk about her growing up in the 50s, and she wants to have a story to tell her grandchildren and her children. So JoAnn, why don't you tell us a little bit about...
Right. I was born in 1942 in New Orleans. It was World War II was raging. The country was rationing. And on most of the magazine covers you saw pictures of Rosie the Riveter, which was a situation where the men were at war, and so they weren't able to do the jobs that they were doing here, and women went back out and worked in construction and factories and everything to keep the country going. I didn't know too much about the war because I was a baby, but then I grew up in the most phenomenal era of the 50s. I'll tell you what we didn't have, and then what was good. We didn't have air conditioning, but the good side of that was that we, grew up in Carrollton section. Everybody had front porches, and people would sit out at night, and they would, take a extension cord, bring their radios out, and all the neighbors would sit out on the porch and listen to the programs that they had on radio and talk and, mingle. Also, everybody had flowers outside of their windows, and you got to smell the gardenias and the honeysuckle and the night jasmine that came in with the window fans. We didn't have, of course, computers. We didn't have microwave ovens, no television. And there was just one channel. It was Channel 6. And for children, they had Clarabelle Clown and Miss Muffet and some other shows that we got to enjoy. Movies were 12 cents, so you could go to the movie for 12 cents, and they had a lot of neighborhood shows. You could ride the bus for 7 cents and go from one end of the town to the other, and it was a much safer era. You didn't hear anything about drugs and all the problems that we have today, so your parents felt okay about letting you ride your bike across town to go all over. When I grew up in the 60s, which was my early teenage years, it was like the golden era of music. I mean, we had Frank Sinatra, they called him the voice. We had the romantic listening to Johnny Mathis and Ella Fitzgerald and some of the other greats. And then we had, of course, rock and roll was born with Elvis Presley. And we would go out, the girls would wear these starched can slips. We'd go out in the car, no air conditioning, it would stick to your skin. But you knew you were looking good, and there was a lot of football games and, a lot of parties. And instead of the malls where people go today, we had Canal Street, which you dressed up, wore your gloves, and went down to Canal Street. But also we had Pontchartrain Beach, where you could walk down the Midway, and that was kind of like the malls now, because you could meet people that way, get on the rods. We also had the old beach where you had picnics and all because of the air conditioning situation. We used to have places where you could go to have watermelon because there was no Burger King, no McDonald's. They had these long tables like picnic tables, and you'd go with your family and have watermelon in the evening. So it's a much more innocent era that we lived in, and didn't have as many conveniences. Another thing we didn't have is you had washing machines, but they didn't take the soap or the water out of your clothes. You had a wringer, and you would put the clothes through the wringer, and it would go into a utility tub full of water. Then you'd have to pass it through the wringer again to get the water out and hang them on the line. So that was how red beans and rice on a Monday became so popular, because people were doing the wash back then, and it was an all-day process. So you'd put your beans and rice on, and you'd let them cook, and you'd be outside doing the wash.
So after the 50s, tell me, how did you meet your husband, and some of the romance around that, because I think your grandchildren and your children might be interested in that.
I met my husband, Emile Tujak. We were out by the beach, which was where everybody went back then, and there was a restaurant called Bart's that's no longer there. And that's the first time that I saw him, and there was an immediate connection. And then actually we met later on. There was the Montleon Hotel had a lounge that circled around, and he was at the bar. It just rotated, and that's where I actually met him. He left a business card in my purse and to call him. And I did, and 4 years later we were married, and I had Nicole and Emile, 2 wonderful children, and now I have my 5 grandchildren. which possibly y'all may be listening to now if you're, looking at this tape. And I hope maybe it lets you know some of the good things that you have now and some of the wonderful things that we had as well.
And what are your grandchildren's names?
Well, first was Nicholas, then Katie, then Madeline, and then we had Chloe and Bryce. So I've really been blessed. They're beautiful children and bring a lot of joy into my life.
What was it like being the mother of Emil and Nicole? What were they like as kids from your...
They were the most beautiful children, of course, and they were good and wonderful, and they turned out to be the most phenomenal adults. I mean, they're such good people with good hearts. I was truly blessed with my children. And my grandchildren give me a lot of pleasure as well, so I hope that they turn out like their parents because they're blessed to have the good people that they do as parents.
Now, what was it like for you growing up as a little girl with Josephine, the Mistrettas, the Ovinos? What was that world like? And then with the Wheel family, all those people.
It was different. People back then lived close to each other. Like my cousins all lived close to me, so we all knew each other. The Ovinas, I think there was 3 different Ovinas that lived on Coolidge Street down the block from one another. There were always big Sunday dinners. So our cousins were more like brothers and sisters because we had such a close relationship living the way we did. And I think all the Europeans that came in kind of tended to stay in the same area of town. My mother grew up in the French Quarter, and then they moved to the Carrollton area, which is where I grew up. My dad bought in one of the first subdivisions in Metairie, the house on Varden Avenue. It's in Beverly Knowles subdivision. Everybody thought that it was like the country because it was so far from the main city. Veterans Highway was like a dirt road back then, and across the lake was hardly non-existent. So there's been a lot of changes in the 65 years that I've been around.
And you had your mother's father, your grandmothers. Were you close to your grandmothers, Mrs. Ovina, Miss Mistretta?
Very, very much so. My grandmother Ovina, my grandfather met her in Napoleonville, and she was a tall woman, the only tall person in the family. She was a wonderful seamstress. She sewed for the balls, the Mardi Gras balls. She was a phenomenal cook, did her own pasta, made it from scratch. She had flowers on both sides of the street, and I can always remember her sitting out in her rocking chair on the front porch, really enjoying it. My grandmother Katie, I was way close to because we lived either next door to her or with her most of our lives, and she was the sweetest thing on earth. Just very smart, not book smart, but very knowledgeable in the ways of the world, even though she didn't have an education. And these women had a hard time because they came from another country and didn't know the language and really had to educate themselves, had a lot of children, worked hard, and kept their sense of humor. They were wonderful, marvelous women.
And speaking of marvelous women, you're pretty marvelous yourself.
Thank you.
Is there any message you'd like to, I don't know if the grandchildren and your children will have this for a long time or not, but if they do, is there any message that you'd like for them to keep from you?
I would like them, right off the top of my head, to stay close to each other, to know that there is a bond that they share, and not to forget it, because the blood relationship there should be strong, and I would like them to stay as close as they possibly could, to be friends and to enjoy each other and share their precious moments of their life.
Very good, very good. Well, until for now, we'll conclude this little interview, and we may do this again. So stay tuned, kids. More from Mama, Grandma, Granny. Thank you.